Welcome to another episode of Coffee Call, where on this show I just bring a bunch of my friends on and we talk about church and culture and I guess the state of the world right now as we speak. So thank you guys for coming in. Today I got a wonderful brother of mine popping in, just talking about the state of the church and where the church has been, maybe how COVID and this pandemic has affected church. And what I mean by that is the organism of how church has been run traditionally has been shifted dramatically. And so, with all this things about we can't go to church and we can't be together in person has really affected the church somehow. And even in that comment or even in that phrase right there, there's a lot of interpretation that goes into it. So we're going to talk about all that of what the church means and how we as the people of God or people of this faith community want to continue to practice our different faith expression. For me, especially in the Protestant Christian tradition, how we want to practice. And so I got a brother of mine. He is the communication director for the United Methodist Church denomination, which I served for a little bit. So it's really cool to hang out with this guy. And yeah, so we're going to bring him on right now. And he's going to introduce himself. So here we go. What's going on, brother? How you doing, man?
Good morning, Paul.
Right.
It's good
So
to
I
be
don't think
with
I
you.
said your name. And so why don't you introduce yourself and what you do and where you're at? It was funny. It's funny how you said why you're in the car that you're in. So go ahead.
Yes, my name is James. I'm with the United Methodist Church currently. Grew up in it, and here in the LA area, doing some other things. Maybe we'll get to talk about later. I'm in the parking lot of a local Starbucks in my home office right here. You can see behind me.
That's right.
I am not homeless, and that's not why I'm in this car. And I mean, no shame to anyone who's living like that. But for myself, this has become my office, and I made it out to the Starbucks. I didn't make it in time to actually get a coffee, but I'm about to get one as
Right.
soon as we are done.
Right. So I got your coffee right here with
Thank you.
us for the both of us. Yeah. And so I think the first time I met James, I was trying to recall how we first met. I know how we first met in person, but I think a pastor recommended me talking to you for some reason. I don't know. Maybe I was just I don't know. I was just frustrated and my pastor didn't want to talk to me about it. So here's another Asian guy that you can talk to about the same age. And so I talked to you on the phone. I think we talked a little bit. And then we first saw each other at annual conference for lunch.
That's right.
So I know we first met there. And for all those people that are listening and watching, I'm gonna tell you guys a little secret. I thought this guy for the longest time, I think it was like 4 or 5 years that we had relationship, was like older than me by like 10 years. I'm no joke, no joke. I thought this guy was like in the
Oh
Korean
man,
culture. If somebody's older, you show them respect. You gotta show
that's
everybody
right.
respect. But in Korean culture, it's very visual, this type of respect. So I was like,
Yes, sir.
man, this guy is much older than me. And then I come to find out when I leave, this guy's younger than me. And so that was pretty cool. But this guy is still like very much like my mentor because he guided me a lot through this
Thanks.
process. Because as you said, you grew up in the United Methodist Church. I came in, and then we worked together for a long time, had a wonderful relationship, and still continuing that relationship.
Amen.
So for all everybody's listening, the reason why I brought this guy out here because he's very I forgot to say that part in his job description. He's also an innovator, right? He does innovative things for the
Hmm.
United Methodist,
Apparently. Hmm.
apparently, which we both know,
Yeah.
not just United Methodist Church, but all these churches might kind of need at some point in this season. And
Amen.
so we wanted to talk about, where the church has been, how maybe COVID has affected some of that situation, and how we're going forward. So I think the first question for me is for you, James. What is the church? And how do you define the church and where it's been so far?
Wow, that's such a big question, and something that takes a long time to answer. But I want to say, first of all, I want to affirm and also support what it is that you are doing with Free Life. And I only have the best wishes for it. I wish I could do more for it and yourself, but you're always in my prayers, and yourself and your whole family. As you well know, ministry is a family business, whether we like it or not. And everything that we all have to do to pull together, especially those of us who are living together, I hope that everything is happening and is going to turn out well. I think, you know, so this pandemic thing has really called that what is the church question into question. What is the
Mhm.
church into question? And because of what has had to happen in terms of worship, it being having to move over to kind of an online venue, people have emphasized that the church is not the building and that it's the people. And I think that's a really good way to put it. I think that in this pandemic time, it won't be enough for us to have that as an answer. And
Mm.
I think that as we have made that shift from church is not the building, church is the people, I think eventually, if we are able to just be honest enough and follow kind of the leading of the Holy Spirit, my own view and not the view of my employer and not the view of my mom and not the view of anyone else, just my own view is that the church is going to pass and go beyond being the people. The church is going to be the mission.
Mm.
um, when we ask ourselves what it is that we give ourselves to, we obviously give ourselves to God. And where it is that we say that we serve in the church. And how it is that we are a disciple, we do that in the church. But what this pandemic time has shown is that to only say that it is the people with whom and for whom and by whom and so on and so forth, we do all these things, is not enough. And it seems that what we have to now do is kind of scramble and struggle to find a purpose that is even greater than the people. The purpose comes
Wow.
from God. And so that purpose, I think, in kind of incarnational terms, is the mission. What
Mm.
really is the point of us, quote unquote, being the church and us being disciples?
Mm.
Much like biblical times, particularly in the Hebrew Bible times, what I think what we our situation is akin to is the Israelites and their um, and they're being part of what's called the diaspora. They have been
Mm.
spread out. They are not able to be at quote unquote home, and they are not able to kind of be in their quote unquote native environment. And because of that now, but what has kept them together, or what kept them together during that time, is whatever they believe, in my terms, what their mission was, and what made them believe that they were a common people with a
Mm.
common purpose. And so going forward, I think that the church will be whatever we believe that the divine mission is.
Mhm. So talking about, so I love the way you said it. It's the purpose of what God has called us to do or put in our convictions, and because of that purpose we're living out of in that mission, right? And so obviously in that mission there's different ways of expressing it, and traditionally the way we express it, especially in the western world, is in a building, in a time slot, with traditions and certain I guess limitations, or guidelines, not limit, well, guidelines can be limits too. So guidelines and certain types of clothes and manners, and how do you think or why do you think those were some of the expressions that I guess Western Christianity adapted, and how did that maybe hinder or challenge us to maybe move forward or think forwardly? Because
Yes,
obviously, yeah, because obviously, if we're stuck in a building, or that's what we call church sometimes, we're only going to take people. We're only going to see, hear, and take care of the people that we see and hear inside those four walls.
amen.
So yeah, what do you think about that?
So I think that the reason why it was that way is because probably that's all that we have ever known. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we lived in a world where, I mean, it's really unreal to talk about it this way, but we used to live in a world where we can just move freely and own property, and that
Mm-hmm.
property was probably one of our greatest asset in order to deliver this thing that we call ministry.
Mm-hmm.
Out of that property, we can have that event that we call worship that brings in the money. Out of
Mm-hmm.
that property, we can have our food that comes in from the regional food bank, and then we are able to distribute that food. Out of that property, we are able to meet together and have our small groups and Bible study. Out of that property, we are able to have our office and also kind of a name in the community. And so that property and everything that comes along with it was kind of one of the greatest assets by which to have value and also bring in revenue. Now, this pandemic thing has said, you can't have that anymore, and that
Mm-hmm.
value has gone down all the way. So, in my mind, we have kind of uh, uh, lost kind of that common bond. And you're right in that what it had done in terms of our mindset is um, church has what I call a bundle. Church is a bundle, much like whenever we need to buy cable TV, kind of not too many of us do that anymore, and
Mm-hmm.
they're kind of the cable industry is in a crisis. But you couldn't say that I want only these 5 channels. You have
That's
to
right.
buy like the combo of like 100, and then you're only going to watch 5 or something like that,
That's
but you
right.
pay for the 100. And
Mm-hmm.
the church bundle was like, first of all, pastor, secondly, building, thirdly, programs, and fourthly, maybe some social engagement. That bundle is being unbundled.
Wow,
And
that's good.
what that means is that going forward, we're going to have to find some new ways of new bonds. Our relationship will not be based on that building anymore. And our
Mm-hmm.
relationship may not be based on what we call membership anymore. It may not even mean the same thing.
Wow.
So going forward, it seems that we're going to have to expand our definition of what it means to definitely be the church. I think the upside of everything is that, as you have said, now we are beginning to realize that we are able to quote unquote reach way more people than we have ever reached
Right.
before. And to be fair, our digital technology and our social media, our social networks, were not necessarily there, let's say 5, 10 years ago, which is when we should have started anyway. I mean, the churches
Mm-hmm.
that started 5, 10 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
their reach was global and
Mm-hmm.
people knew it. But the thing is that the churches who didn't need that or thought that they didn't need that and who could do just fine financially without that, now they are understanding
Mm-hmm.
the power of being able to do this digitally. And that kind of reach is now going to make us ask, like, where really is the line between churched and unchurched people? What
Mm-hmm.
really is the line between people of faith and people not of faith, and so on and so forth? What really is the line between member and not member, and so on and so forth? So
Mm-hmm.
um, I think, in thinking along those lines, we have a lot of expansion to do.
So like you said, the churches that figured that out maybe 5, 6 years ago, that because everybody obviously is on social media, not just for play anymore, for work. I have a sister that's a digital media marketer for a big company that didn't exist 5 years ago,
Right.
right? All the marketing was physical marketing, right? Whether
Right.
that's magazines or advertisement. But
Right.
now she got into a company. She just changed jobs to a company,
Yeah.
and she's yet to meet her employees or coworkers.
Right.
That's crazy. She's never been to the office.
Yes.
She never went to work, physical brick and mortar place. She's
That's
never met
right.
her boss in person.
That's right.
Everything was done online,
Yes.
and she's killing it. You know what I mean? And
Right.
so, why do you think some churches, and I think it's also because of, and I see this in more mainline denominations,
Hmm.
the challenge of thinking this way or thinking outside the box, where
Hmm.
more independent non-denominational churches, because they're not maybe restricted or they have that history of tradition.
Hmm.
Why do you think mainline denominations or majority of, I don't know, churches have this type of challenge when it comes to
Hmm.
thinking or using what we already have
Yeah.
for effectiveness? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Why don't I talk kind of broadly, and then
Mm-hmm.
in terms of church governance, and then a little bit more specifically in terms of um, where things are at in the world. I I can't speak to really non-denominational churches per se. I can kind of mostly speak to my own experience.
Mm-hmm.
My own experience is this: um, that church has a pastor, but also has kind of councils and committees with the pastor making these decisions. And these councils and committees are for the purpose of church governance, like
Mm-hmm.
government. Church is not like a for profit corporation per se, where you have a much more command and control structure, much more executive structure. In
Mm-hmm.
church and in nonprofits in general, you have a stronger governance structure. Why is that important? Because what that means is that committees often are there to keep things stable, and stability helps. Number one, an organization do the wrong thing. Do the right thing, which is uh, 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 not doing anything that should be wrong. But secondly, what that means is behaviorally, a committee or committees get used to and get really good at figuring out how to say no, and
Mm-hmm.
they don't always feel confident about when to say yes or how to say yes. And what that means is that they begin to be more and more used to making decisions around things that they're familiar with,
Mm-hmm.
not things that they are unfamiliar with. And so when you have a situation that is unfamiliar and now you have to act in unfamiliar ways, or even worse, which is when you have a situation where there's nothing unfamiliar going on, except you really do need to act in unfamiliar ways, it becomes really, really difficult for a church to do that and committees to do that. No
Mm-hmm.
judgment. That's the purpose of the committee. It's
Mm-hmm.
for accountability and to
Right.
make sure that the church is going to be okay. But that's
Mm-hmm.
when things like innovation become really, really difficult. I think I think that what we are slowly starting to see, and what we'll see more, is the trend that we've seen in what you might call direct to consumer retail brands. That, for example, we are used to going to the mall and
Mm-hmm.
going to a store of a brand that we have interacted with and we've had experience with through that store. And then when the internet happened, we were able to order things online, and that's the way that we were able to interact with the brand. Except 99% of the time, we start with the store and then
Right.
go to the website.
Right. Right.
Now we are seeing brands that start on the website, and if
Right.
they want to, they will have a store.
Right.
And one of the things that they keep on saying, which is very, very interesting to me, is that they say, you know what? We make our money off of our online orders. Whenever we have a store, it's a pop up store. We don't make money off of what
Right.
we sell there.
Right.
The reason why we do that is because once we have a store, the people who became our fans when we were online, they come and they
Mm,
start telling us about how they used our products and how much they love it and why they love it. And then they start talking to each other, these fans.
mm,
And then they have what we call community. That's the word that they use, these brands, for-profit corporations. We have these brick and mortar stores, pop-up stores, because of the community that we are able to make through that and what we learn from the community. And what that tells me is that they are using our playbook. They are
mm.
using our playbook, ours meaning the church, and kind of what we have called the venues and the means of community has been, that's where it has gone. And ironically, we ourselves in the church have not been able to think in terms of going digital first and then in person second. But now
Right.
we are being forced to do that. So yeah, that's where I think we're at.
Wow. Wow. That's good. Yeah, I think there's a church out in Ohio. I think it's Ohio. Transformation Church.
Mm,
Pastor Michael Todd.
mm,
He's been online for the past like 10 years.
mhm,
Maybe about 100 views, 150 views, but he was consistent, right? And then
mhm.
so when this pandemic happened, man, he blew up like
Right,
million folds.
right,
So, and then now this guy's speaking all over the country in a matter
right.
of like overnight
Yeah,
success, right?
right.
Overnight exposure.
Yes.
And so, and I think, yeah, and so I think that's what we're seeing now in the church
Mhm.
is that those churches that's been successful in using social media, using these platforms and being consistent with it,
Yes.
and because of our church culture hasn't caught up to it now,
Yes.
because now we're forced to use it,
Yes.
it's a game changer.
Right.
It's a game changer. So that's good. And then I think this is where I want to lead into what some of you're trying to do as well.
Yes.
So what's the work that you're trying to do outside of your church work, I guess?
Yeah. Thank you, Paul. Part of what I have learned over my short life, I guess, so far is that calling comes from God, and
Mm,
what that means is that I believe my whole life is a ministry, and in 2013, which is when our first son was born, was also the year that my dad died. My dad was a pastor, Korean immigrant church, and his dad was a pastor, and but his dying made me face a lot of questions that I think while he was around, I didn't really have to um, face.
mm,
And in doing so, I think what it has led me to do is to work on this personal project called Pastoria at pastoria.co. I call it a leadership innovation consultancy, but whatever. What it's trying to do is pretty much kind of change the environment, the mental
mm,
environment, the spiritual environment for pastors who are trying to do well and do good and make it through this time, to teach on what's happening in terms of our social trends and to convert that into strategies for ministry. And just kind of recently had an event, a digital first one day conference. Also started a podcast called The Last Seminary. It's on almost any podcast channel. I think the latest episode had yourself on it.
oh wow,
Um, I think so. That is kind of what I've been working on so far.
that's good. Yeah, and some of the stuff that we've talked about is, you know, not to try to, I guess, change the
Hmm.
church, but how can we continue to, move forward, get impact, especially for the next generation?
Yeah.
Because what I found out is, especially during this time of COVID and topics about racial, and racism and stuff like that. When you're there's two types of communities that I see in church. One, in the church, pews, and then we call them parking lot church, right? And so the pews is more of where you get talked at, right? Talked to,
Mm,
where in the parking lot, it's more of the community where you're talking about. They take
mm,
what they receive, they come back, and then they talk about it amongst themselves. And
yes.
so in this season, that's where we're at in the parking lot all the time now, because that's all we can do. We can't sit in the pews together. And so what I've realized is I've joining all these different communities. I started to see where everybody's mental state was, spiritual health was, emotional health was, and I found that to be very helpful to the ministry that God has called me to, and also
Yeah.
changed the way I think too. And
Uh-huh.
so in these communities, what do you think is happening that hasn't happened before in the
Yeah.
church? Because even in church, we have small groups, right? But they weren't, maybe for me, wasn't as effective for some reason. But now
Mm-hmm.
we're forced to. That's all we can do. So
Mm-hmm.
so what changed? Is it because we're forced to? Is that what we have to do as a church? We have to force people to do stuff. What
Right.
changed, you think? Why are
Yeah.
people being more intentional about meeting now than ever?
Yeah. So you know what I think? Uh, we're walking into a little bit controversial territory, but again, my view, not the view of my denomination, not the view of my spouse, is that I think that we have come upon a time uh, of what I call I am many, or a
Mm,
congregation of one. What I mean by that is that we have been really consumed with the effort to build and grow congregations where, if you might picture it like a sanctuary or worship space, and all these different kinds of people come, and you have this unit, this entity called a congregation, as a bundle, as we talked about, that we're trying to build and grow.
mm,
What we are in now is a time of believing, I think, that every life is a ministry and every person is the minister of their own life.
that's right.
And one of the things that number one, number two, the other thing that we are realizing is that each life is not just one thing, but it is one person in many, many places. So, for example, in family, in their own mind, mental health, in their work, in their society,
Mm,
all of these things are coming together. And these are, though, different spaces that one person has to be in all at once. And
that's right.
what that means is that this, much like the diversity that you might see, not ethnic, but in terms of life types and life stages that you might see in a congregation, is now being compacted into one person. The third thing is that now that is being even more affirmed by the fact that once we have gone digital first, we become user centric. It's about
Mm,
what is the person at the keyboard, what is it that their perspective is. It's not necessarily going to be centered around the perspective of an organization or a brand per se, at least not in the same way. And so when you put these three things together, and the fact that you might go to pick up something at the grocery store and come back with a disease that takes your life in 2 weeks or
mm,
something like that, it has raised the stakes. And if you don't get a disease, you may lose your job, because who knows
mm,
how the economy is going to go. And so when you put all those things together and you raise the stakes for people, what you realize is that people are going to start getting real serious. They're not going to be, just living like any life anymore. Now they
right.
have to ask themselves questions about these things. And I think in that way, the kinds of interactions that we need, that we get to have with people, are becoming way more serious. And I think that they are being more serious about it.
That's good. Yeah, because as you were talking, I was thinking, man, the different types of groups that I'm in right now, I'm part of a leadership group, but I'm also part of a book club,
There you go.
but I'm also part of a just a regular small group fellowship. These
Yes.
different spaces,
Yeah.
um, but and I would even like to add, even those different spaces, especially people of faith like us or
Right.
Christians.
Yeah.
there is that one underlining, which is,
Yes.
God, and
Yes.
our will to continue to serve
Right.
God and live in God's will, whatever that
Yes.
means, and through His expression. So and I think that's where the umbrella of church, and we talked about in the beginning, that community,
Yes.
that's where we still want to be a part of.
Sure.
But now we don't have to just take as is. And
Right.
I want to be careful with this language of picking and choosing, but due to our, I want to say, calling and gifts, now we can go find those people that has the same similar callings of gifts that we might not have known.
That's right.
And the funny thing is, we didn't know that when we saw them in person, but now
Mhm.
we know that when we can't see them. Isn't that funny?
Yes.
And so
Absolutely.
that's where I think, and that's where I think we're in the state, and I think we're still trying to figure it out.
Absolutely. Yes.
People are. It's so funny because when you're in Zoom calls or these things, two things happen. One, a new member, you know how in person they stay quiet.
Yes.
In the digital world, they don't type or they don't share their screen.
Right.
That's right. But then after a couple of weeks, when they are comfortable, now they
Yes.
pop on, and then now
Right.
they're looking. They're just looking
Yes.
around,
That's
and
right.
then after a week later, they might say like, "Hey guys," and say
Yeah.
one thing. So it's
Right.
it's so similar to offline or live,
There you go.
but because we're still people,
Yes.
and so that's what I've noticed. That's what I've noticed these days. Um, where do you think, in your mind, because of all these changes and because of the reality of, what they say, the trending word of the new normal,
Hmm.
where do you think the church is headed?
Hmm.
Yeah, where do you think the church is headed in your mind for right now,
Yeah.
or should be headed? Right?
Okay. So
Yeah.
I think there's two different
Yeah.
answers once you
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
ask it that way, and I think that we have to think about it in terms of the pandemic and what the pandemic, the experts are telling us. I hope that we believe them. Is that in general, there is no real end in sight for coronavirus. That
Mm,
it's not something that we're going to eliminate.
right.
Number one. Number two, there is going to be a vaccine, but likely end of this year is, if we're lucky, probably beginning of next year. And then it's going to start off with specific populations. It's not going to go to everybody. It's going to
Mm,
probably start with elderly people and maybe some healthcare workers. I mean, they're going to probably have to be a priority, and then everyone else, which means it's going to take some more time. And even after that, I think there's going to be some hesitancy for people to want to meet in person.
right.
So it's going to be, I think, 1 to 2 years at least since the beginning of our lockdown, which was sometime in March, I think that it was. So we can think about it that way in terms of the time period. And then secondly, I think we have this economic hit that I think the church is often slower to get hit economically than like businesses up front for whatever reason.
Mm,
And so uh, that and kind of the attitude on the part of many people that this is kind of a temporary thing
hmm
and we'll get back to church as it was means that I think in the short term we're not going to see all that much change for the church. I think
mm,
even when we are in a pandemic, I see that most churches, yes, they have moved from the worship from in person to kind of digital first, but they are very uncomfortable with it because, see, putting on worship is like trying to build a car or something like that, right? There is a factory line. There's like an assembly
hmm
line. You have to. Okay, so let's put the pieces together. Let's put the people together. Let's bring who's going to get the communion bread. What's the songs going to be? And there's like this assembly line that makes the in-person worship. Now we're making something else. We went from
mm,
building cars with a gas engine to like Teslas or something like
mm,
that. And so we are not used to it, and we are forcing ourselves to do it. pastors are tired. They are
Right.
tired. People are tired of doing that, and it's awkward. Of course, it is. It's not meant. Our in-person
Hmm.
worships are not meant for the digital first space,
Right.
and so they're tired. But as people get tired, maybe over time, and as the finances begin to change, I think in the longer term, we will have a little bit more change. And what I think the change, as we've been talking about, in terms of every life is a ministry and every person is a
Hmm.
minister, this kind of attitude will do is make things a little bit more lay centric. It'll make
Mm.
things a little bit more
What
lay
does that mean,
centric.
lay centric?
That means that it will
That's a
the
big word, James. That's a
yes,
big
sir.
word.
The role of a clergy person often, which is to kind of uh, uh, be the person and whose teachings that people follow,
Hmm.
will kind of shift into a clergy person supporting
Hmm.
these lay people who are trying to lead their own life or lead their own ministry, be the minister of their own ministry. And the lay persons will more and more begin to, let's say, lead small groups, lead Bible study. More and more, they will be the persons who, let's say, initiate certain ministries or themselves join other kind of, let's say, social engagement or social justice, social action ministries. They will not necessarily do it in the name of a church brand, let's
Right.
say. They will do it in the name of their own selves,
Mm.
this kind of thing. And what we, like we have thought about as a congregation of many will be, in my mind, continue to be more of a congregation of one, or one person trying to develop more than one congregation in their own life. And what that means is that the church is going to have to be more of a platform, and less uh, of a place where people have to kind of fit themselves into. I
Right.
think the
Right.
church is going to have to fit itself more into each individual person.
Right. So the church, s- so so the church, you think still, and I'm saying this as a church as an organization, right? The
Yeah,
church will be still needed, but now I guess the organization or the committees that are um, just coming together collectively to support
right.
it has to
Yes,
change the vision,
yes,
um, to what where it's more, like you said, lay centric
right.
or supportive role, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I was watching The Last Dance. I don't know if you watched it with Michael
Not
Jordan.
yet, not
Yeah,
yet.
it's good, man. It's good. And so
Okay.
there's a lot of like biblical meanings behind it
Oh, okay. All
about
right.
leadership, and
Right.
especially about like being a servant leader, because
Mm,
Michael Jordan was the ultimate leader, right?
mm, mm-hmm.
And so I didn't know like sides of Michael Jordan until now. The only thing you know about him is the shoes and the Air Jordan and the tongue and stuff like that. But if you see the way he like led the teams
Right.
from when he was young to when he was older,
Yes,
drastic change, but
I see.
same
Right.
mentality,
Mm-hmm.
same that attacking, win by any means necessary.
Right.
And so where in the beginning it was all about him, at the end
Yes.
of the day, it's still all about him,
Yes.
but he needs support to get him there, right?
Right.
Whether
Mm-hmm.
that's culture or for him, it's age, right? Physically. And so I think the church is the same way. Well, the church that traditionally was run, where back in the day, and I don't know if this was meant to be this way, but it was all about how to serve the church, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the church is the one that provides everything for the people, right?
There you go.
I don't know if it was meant to be that way, but it is.
Mm-hmm.
It was. It is what it is. But
Right.
now it's like, no, people are fine. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? That they're good. And so either and then the church, but we still need the church, right?
Right.
Because that's where, like you said, it is the platform, it is our hub, is where we can get the resources from. But if it doesn't meet us where we're at, or at least halfway, right?
Yes.
I think
Yes.
people are still,
Yes.
honor the the traditional entity of what that is.
Yeah.
And so if not that, then especially in the time where we can't meet, we
Yeah.
gonna miss it. We're gonna miss out.
Right.
Um, and so for you, maybe in as we close out for you in short, James's. church doctrine, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do you
Mm-hmm.
think some of the necessary things are now moving forward?
Mm-hmm.
How the church should be the church, right?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. So, it is much like, I think, what we talked about with your sister,
Hmm.
and the very fact that not too long ago, there was not necessarily a position like the one that she had right now. And we should just kind of ask ourselves, well, the typical church in the United States of America, um, what does it have that kind of position, right? So,
Mm,
like, do we teach in our seminaries our people to be in ministry digitally? Do we have positions for people to be in ministry digitally? And now, what does it mean? It means kind of more so that almost anyone who is in ministry in some kind of staff or pastoral position has to have that kind of understanding or those kinds of skills. And it also means that, when we used to, let's say, kind of, we're going to get a building and we're going to redo the floors and we're going to put in some lights and we're going to work on
hmm.
the PA system and the amp and the speakers and the mics and things like that. Now, what are we going to get? We're going to get
Mm,
the kind of mic that we have in front of you right now. We're going to get
right.
the kind of tech kind of hardware that we need to make it happen. We're also gonna have to get the software that we haven't had before. And we are used to having church building as, again, the asset by which to deliver ministry. There are now what's called church tech, different kinds of software platforms. Like, I think pray.com is one of those
Hmm.
things, and a bunch of others that are now popping up, that I think the church is going to have to learn how to use.
Mm,
So, and our definition, going way, way back to what we talked about in the beginning, of church, going beyond building, beyond people, to now
mm,
mission.
hmm.
Perhaps the primary role of the church now is to help people come up with what their really mission is. I think people are feeling really disoriented. They're having trouble finding the, like, centering
Right,
themselves.
right,
and
right, right,
and
right.
I think part of that has to do with the fact that through in-person life they were able to kind of write their life story, but now they're not able to write it in that way. So now we have to help them write
Mm,
their life story in
yeah.
these new kinds of ways. And so that's where I think I see the church going.
When you said that the seminaries have to start teaching these things, I was like, "Oh snap! James is going to be a professor." I can see
No,
you
I
up
hope
there.
not.
Well, I've seen you. I've seen
Yeah,
you teach this stuff way before even the pandemic,
thanks,
and I
thanks,
was
buddy.
like, if these people, and I'm looking around,
Yeah.
and at that time the demographics was a lot of older gentlemen and
Yes,
women,
sir. Yes,
sisters and
sir.
brothers, and I'm like, if these people don't get their act together,
Yeah.
they're gonna close soon. And we've seen that. We've seen churches
Yes.
close due to
Yes.
pandemic, and we never want to see a community not being able to serve God, especially. And we still want to respect their cultural context, right?
Absolutely.
And we still want to respect that, but at the same time,
Yeah.
we can't continue to live in the past in a way,
Right.
because the world is moving forward, and if we're going to
Yes.
be effective for the future, um, for the future, we have to continue to find ways to be innovating, and listen to people like you, see other churches how they do it, learn from one another,
Yes.
because it's about serving, it's about remembering the past generation, serving the
Yes.
now generation, and
Right.
building for the next generation, right?
Yes.
And if we're not doing that, then what is the mission, right? Is it just
Yeah.
to continue doing these small little clubs? But so how can people reach you if they want to talk to you? And yeah, how can they reach you? Usually people watch this later. I don't know why. It's
No
always
problem.
people watching it later.
No problem.
And then I tell them the time, but they always watch it later. But
Yeah.
how can they reach you and maybe
Yeah.
get a contact of you?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram at pastoria.co, pastoria.co,
Mm,
and that's James at pastoria.co, and the website pastoria.co. That's the way you can follow along and reach me. And I really appreciate it. I think um, having me on as guest is a real honor, Paul. And I also, just as I said before, though, want to also say that it is the kind of ministry that you're doing that I hope that we see more in the future too. And we didn't get to talk about it this time, but your focus on intentionally being
Mm,
multi-ethnic and multicultural,
right.
and not just multi, but right?
Hmm.
Being able to interact and is something that now with what's been happening on TV, but
Right.
what has been happening for a long time, we just didn't see it on TV,
Right.
is making that all the more important. And people are not going to let the church off the hook on that one.
That's right.
So I want to again say my appreciation for what you're doing.
Yeah, thanks. And I think it's just, being in this space and looking at the world, and especially like you said, you come from a pastor's family, and so do I. I think you're third generation, so am I. And the church is where you get some of these real questions about
Yes,
politics and social issues, where and the difference between church and the
sure,
workplace, the purpose is money, the purpose
right,
is advancement. Where the
yeah,
church is, the purpose is you're trying to figure yourself out
right,
in this thing called God or whatever, right?
mm-hmm,
Wherever they're at. And so for me, it's like, what is my purpose in this world? And
mm-hmm,
so as we see it, and the way we find that out is listening to the different purposes
right,
and trying to find a bottom common denominator somewhere. And
sure,
for me and you is the gospel of Jesus.
sure,
That's our common denominator. And so whether you're doing that in the teaching realm and supporting pastors, and I'm over here maybe building it in the more community sense or in the church
mm-hmm,
world, we all need each other, and that's why I
mm-hmm.
appreciate your gifts and callings and your friendship and your brotherhood, my friend.
Amen.
So thank you so much for hopping on,
All
and
right.
so thank you, and God bless your ministry and everything that you're doing.
Thank you.
All
You
right,
too.
guys. All right, peace, y'all.